Hello and welcome back. My name is Myre and we're here for another Star Citizen Q&A breakdown. This time we're joining Jared with Assistant Design Director Johnny Jesavicius, Senior Game Dev Rick Porter, and Chris's right-hand man at Community Hopium Machine Rich Tyra, as they break down all the burning questions regarding Alpha 3.23. Let's get into it. So the first question was, how did we end up with the Copion and Marok and not the other stuff that we've seen and heard of before? Things like the Zephyrpod or the blind Oni beetles, space cows, etc. Their answer here was that those creatures, the Zephyrpods, those floating beetles, the space cows that have the detachable udder eggs, the space whales as well, they all have very unique challenges. So with the Copion, they chose something that's pretty simple. They also added that the Maroks, or the Turbo Pelicans as people on Reddit and Twitter have been calling them, are their first Boyd AI, or as Rich Tyra says, their first lightweight AI. Basically, the Copion are to be as complex and have similar scalable behaviors as things like pirates and human NPCs, whereas the Maroks and other flying creatures are Boyds and are dumb NPCs that will fly around and react accordingly. Eventually we'll have things like fish and other dumb critters that'll have the same AI here as well. Long story short, Boyds will allow them to make more flocks and group style creatures that don't need to be as in-depth or as high fidelity as something like a dog-like creature or a pirate. The second question was all about economy, which is everyone's favorite topic because we seem to hear a lot about the vision for economy, but we don't really see that realized in-game. The question asks, economy updates are few and far between. What can you tell us about 3.23? So for this patch, they have made some changes. For this patch, they reviewed the logic for the pricing on weapons and armor, and from what they've said, they've applied values based on size, quality, the manufacturer prestige as well, and the tech that goes into the weapons and armor. They've also said they've applied this same logic to ships, so that if it can make money, then it's going to cost more money as well, kind of like in the real world. Larger multi-crew ships like the Hammerhead, etc. have also been rebalanced in terms of the money that they cost, in order to emphasize the multiplayer aspect of these ships and the pooling of money to get these vehicles in the first place. Specifically, they said they've also made some changes to salvage as well, which in 3.22 and the patch before as well, had a bit of an issue when it came to the amount of money and the amount of payout you would get, which is a double-edged sword because obviously it helps people, or it helps the devs get more information on these mechanics. However, at the same time, it also lessens the players' want and the players' need to do anything else. So they've gone ahead and they've balanced salvage payouts for things like RCM and CM so that it's more even across the board of other things to do. Apparently also, other money-making exploits were a priority as well, so they can properly test this new economy. There was a very strong emphasis here from Rich Tyra about the fact that a lot of these systems, a lot of missions and gameplay loops have been around the block for a long time, and the balance passes that were made for them were made back then, as they have continued to work on other things and kind of keep pushing the ball forwards. And they kind of need to start to make these systems have more cohesion. That is, that one aspect of the game has to kind of be similar or be as enticing as another. You shouldn't want to go salvaging just because it's the most high-paying thing when you'd probably rather want to be going bounty hunting or racing. They want to make everything cohesive. They want to make everything part of the same living, breathing ecosystem, so you don't feel left out doing your favorite thing, or you don't feel as if, well, I couldn't be doing the thing I want to do because I'm stuck here making money. Which you might argue is on the player, but it's also on the game developer to balance the game in this way. At the end of the day, we're here to have fun. There was also, in this same answer, a small nod to Death of a Spaceman and about death having more consequences in the future. However, Rich didn't really touch upon this very much. There were, of course, questions about if there was going to be a wipe for this patch, and because of everything we talked about in the previous question, the answer is yes, and the reason for this is that they need to wipe money, because otherwise, they're going to get a bunch of false positives from all the people who have made so much money in the previous patches because of the aforementioned imbalances in things like the payouts and salvage and other exploits as well. The next question was, what should we expect with gameplay regarding reputation-based hostility? Apparently this feature, which eventually will make it so that you can gain reputation with different factions and you can be hostile with them but also be friendly with them, and their ability to help you or hinder you will change accordingly, has been put in for 323 but only in a very small way. It's apparently just kind of in terms of a tech manner, in the workings towards getting things ready for Pyro. Apparently it's been set up for 4.0 and Pyro and beyond, and it'll allow you to set up factions and gain reputation with them to support you, etc. They've mentioned that the first place we're going to notice this is in Grim Hex, and then later on down the line with the Duster settlements. How this affects things like the Ninetales lockdown, because Grim Hex is the Ninetales home base, is to be seen. This next question is about Sniper Glint, and it goes, Sniper Glint? It was explained that Sniper Glint was their first foray into giving players feedback against snipers, because up until then, if you were out in the open, say you just got your ship, you're going to Jump Town or something, you'd have no idea that somebody would be on the rocks, hiding behind cover, using some sort of camouflage, and if they're a good shot and they can get you from about a kilometer, then you're dead, without having any idea who shot you, from where, or why. This was their attempt to try and, not necessarily even the scales, but to give players who happen to be looking in the right direction an idea as to where this person is, in an attempt to prevent unavoidable or untelegraphed deaths. Obviously, it's a bit clumsy for now, but they mentioned also that this is because, well, it's brand new, it's a fairly cheap thing for them to do, and they'll try and iron this out. They didn't go into further detail about how they'd be able to iron it out, but things like a smaller glint angle and being able to only use glint in the daytime would certainly help. Ultimately, they're just testing it out, it didn't take too long to make, and they'll dial it in, and if it doesn't work, they'll just turn it off. For the future, they're also thinking about making things like bigger muzzle flashes for the sniper rifles, but also doing things like improved whiz-by sound effects so you can hear where the bullets are coming from better. The next question was, why can we scan other ships, but not our own? I think there was a bit of confusion with how this question was received. Basically, right now, when you scan someone else's ship, if your ship does have a scanner, then you can see a massive breakdown of not only what every single component's on the ship, but also who is on it, the life signs, everything down to their affiliation. Whereas on your own ship, you don't have any access to any of this at a glance. You have to kind of go through very specific menus, and with the new engineering stuff coming through, there is even less information for the pilot to see at a glance. Now, they mentioned that FPS scanning was coming in to allow for some of this eventually, but as for what exactly you'll be able to see with an FPS scan, either with a tool or a visor, or by looking at an item, it wasn't made very clear. This next question is about changes to the flight model. It asks, what was the problem with the old flight model? Where did master modes come from? And why is this the perceived solution to the issues of the past? So Rich said that in their ongoing assessment of the flight model, they noticed that from novice pilots all the way up to more seasoned veterans, that the kind of combat that they saw happening across the board wasn't necessarily what they wanted, or that they decided that they could do better. They didn't like the fact that ships were spacing out too much and were not too much of a fan of what people called jousting, and decided they could do better. Their intention with master modes was to create a system that is fair to use for all players while still rewarding to the better pilots. To try and make it so that if you are brand new to the game and you're going through the tutorial, that you won't just smash your ship into the ceiling before being able to take off, for instance. Lowering the skill floor and that barrier to entry to fly, while also keeping the game competitive and to allow for a large degree of skill expression, I believe is the end goal here for master modes. He mentioned that master modes has been around for a long time internally, and that they're on about their 25th iteration, and what we're going to be seeing with 323 and what we have been seeing in the PTU is that 25th iteration or so of all these internal builds, and it's definitely not the end. However, because of what they've done with this new system, it's going to make it a lot easier for them in the future to keep tweaking this in order to achieve the desired flight model. Ultimately, Rich says he believes in the foundation of master modes over the old system, and with this they can go forward to produce an overall better system. The next question asks, the EPTU has performance issues, to put it lightly. What are we doing to fix it? So the answer here was that, well, they're evaluating everything that everybody does, both in-game through the crash reports, but also through the issue council data. And obviously they have their internal teams too and their QA. One notable example is interaction lag, or interaction queuing, which apparently has something to do with network issues around the replication layer, which is coming in for this new build. Apparently it is most seen when the server performance dips below a certain threshold. They think they've got a fix for this, and by the time of recording, it has not yet been seen in this new build. The next question asks, how concerned are you with another 3.18? And for those of you fortunate enough not to know what 3.18 was or how it played, 3.18 was one of the worst patches in the last 4 or so years within this game. It is one that, for many, it was a period where you just were not able to play the game. In a nutshell, Rich says they don't want another 3.18. However, when it comes down to releasing this patch, they have 2 perspectives here. The first is this going to make the game better? And is the quality of the game what we want it to be? And this, I believe, is what everybody wants with this new patch. They want it to be stable, they want it to be good. However, the second perspective is that they're releasing foundational tech, as in this is iterative tech that they will build upon to create the actual game that we want, with the unfortunate caveat that this often leads to the most unstable builds. 3.18 had foundational tech as well with the PES, or persistent entity streaming, and apparently it was this particular piece of tech that caused all those issues last year, with CIG having to work double time, triple time even, in order to salvage the game and make it playable again. Apparently certain issues just aren't visible in the PTU because they don't have the concurrency. Even when they open up the PTU to everybody, the live build simply just has way more numbers, especially with this patch coinciding with the biggest free fly of the year. The next question follows the same vein. It asks, it seems like there was a lot of things in this patch. Was it too much? So Rich says that he didn't want the Squadron 42 feature set that we're getting in for the game right now, things like the UI, EVA, etc., to take 12 months to transition from when they revealed it at CitizenCon to when we get everything, as it would have not only detracted from those features as a whole, but also taken dev focus away from the important Star Citizen features. Notably, he said, if you give a team 4 months, it's going to take 4 months. And for this and these features, they didn't necessarily need that polish that a whole 4, 6, or 12 months would have taken. The biggest takeaway here was when he said, I needed to get stuff done so we can move on to get stuff in to define Star Citizen as an MMO. With features coming soon like the new org management app that was mentioned in the previous SCL, I cannot wait to see what he means by this. The next question asks yet again about cargo elevators and the new hangar experience. So Rich mentioned that he tested cargo elevators and everything else, and he went through the entire loop, and there were far too many bugs and what he would call blockers that got in the way of gameplay. And something like cargo is something that you experience as a player from the very beginning. And so, in his words, it had to be infallible. And so they're going to go back and they're going to keep ironing it out until it is exactly where it needs to be. Or it needs to be solid and it needs to be good, otherwise the entire game will fall flat on it, because every single style of gameplay, from piracy to cargo to mining and refinery, all rely on it. The next question asks if our landing zones will be the same as in our 3.2 3.0 homes. Apparently, yes. It's going to be that way. They're not going to be doing a full reset. You can, however, use the character reset button to change. However, this will be a complete reset of your money, your reputation, and your in-game purchases, as opposed to just the money wipe happening with the patch to 3.23. It was asked again if Grimhex could be a home in the next patch. So apparently not for 3.23, as there were a bunch of gameplay implications preventing this. Things from the new player experience to the new rep-based hostility and how that's going to work and affect the player. Because imagine if you choose Grimhex as your home and then you go ahead and do a whole bunch of missions, maybe perhaps do Ninetales Lockdown and make all the Ninetales who live in Grimhex and who use Grimhex as their home base and make them your enemies. I don't think they have any concessions for being spawned camped by NPCs yet, especially since you can't change your home either. The next question asks, how do you see Arena Commander? Sometimes it seems important and other times it kind of just falls by the wayside. To answer this, they said that AC is and always has been a great testbed for new features, and right now things like engineering are making it very important indeed. They also mentioned that they might use Arena Commander and more or less confirmed it to use Star Marine, or I guess you can just call it all Arena Commander nowadays, for FPS AI PvE, something that I think everybody's been wanting for a long time and hopefully we see very soon. The next question asks to talk us through the go-no-go process for releasing a patch and its constituent features. So, back in the day, CIG used to make a huge emphasis on what they called go-no-go meetings and sessions, where they'd have a whole bunch of devs around a table and some with telepresence talking about why or what features can't make it into a patch, or can a patch even go through. They've mentioned that they don't really do these anymore with the new way that they release content. Nowadays, it's whatever content is ready for a patch goes out with that patch. And if they review a feature and it can't make it through, then it gets pushed. Just like the hangar and cargo missions that are now slated for 323.x. The next question says, we've seen a hot take about bed logging not fitting the vision of what Star Citizen is going to be. Care to elaborate on what you're thinking about doing with bed logging and how logging in and out will look in the future? This is a callback to a previous dev message by Chad McKinney talking about how they were internally thinking about how bed logging works right now and how it doesn't necessarily currently fit their current ideas and visions for how it will work. He didn't necessarily say it was going anywhere, however, he did say that it was going to be changing in a fundamental way. The devs on panel today said that they were in favor of keeping bed logging and actually added that bed logging in the future will add things like buffs for sleeping in a bed. However, having a bed shouldn't be a requirement. They mentioned that wherever you log out in the game, either in the snow in Microtech or somewhere in the city or in deep space, if you log back in, that's exactly where you will be. You'll no longer just wake up in a hab somewhere that you didn't log out in the first place. This, however, doesn't really fully answer the true question as to what's happening with bed logging, because I don't think that that's what the hot take from Chad was really all about. The original vision for bed logging was all about how if I was to use a bed to log out, then my ship will disappear. If I do not use a bed to log out, then my ship will not disappear. This initially was always one of the strengths as to why you would buy an Aurora that has a bed over something like a Mustang Alpha, as the implication way back then was that if you use the Aurora to bed log, then you do not exist anymore. However, with the Mustang, it's kind of there in space and maybe perhaps it would autopilot. The whole thing was still very conceptual, and so they didn't really explain any further than that. Aside to say that ships of a certain size, like the Idris, would still persist in-game even if you were to bed log and had to be berthed at a hangar or at a dock to despawn. That particular part of the puzzle was not addressed either with Chad's message and how they're planning for that to happen, but also with this as well. So I'll try and keep you posted. The next question says, currently it's very hard to be a bad guy in Star Citizen. Basically, there's huge disadvantages to having crime stats, and there isn't really a place to go besides Grim Hex. How will the upcoming changes affect those pirate players, both PvP and PvE? Is there something planned with cargo and hangar reworks in the long run? So long story short, the answer here is Pyro. While the Stanton system will still offer high risk, high reward for players of a less than legal nature, they also want to give them a zone where they can do things a bit more freely. They made a point here to say that piracy isn't necessarily against players at all times, and that Star Citizen is both a PvE game and a PvP game at the same time. Because of this, the end goal here is to facilitate both as well as they can. They want to allow for PvP piracy, but they also want players to have cool, engaging PvP combat against people who want to have the same. With the ability to join all the different gangs in Pyro, I'm sure there are going to be plenty of ways to be a bad guy in SC. They also mentioned the ability to work in the shadows for organized crime. However, I'm not necessarily sure what they mean by this. The next question asks, where is the place of solo players in 323 and future patches? To answer, Rich says that if you want to be a solo player in the verse, you can. and there are many ways in which you can do this. There will, however, be goals that are difficult to do for a solo player, such as storming, boarding, and stealing an Idris, or buying one, or earning the rep to get the rights to manufacture your own, and flying it afterwards. Now, it was just an analogy, but did you get that last part? Rich made mention of earning rep to get the rights to manufacture your own ship. Anyway, Rich then goes on to say that the expectation of SC is that it's an MMO, or at least it's going to be one. However, there will be content that'll make it easier to achieve with one player. They also mention that hiring an NPC, one of the oldest promised and eldritch of mechanics, will also be in the future and is on their internal roadmaps as well to help assist the single player experience. And finally, the last question asks, why don't we have night vision? So I was surprised by this answer because there's good news here. Apparently, they were just working on night vision the day before. Johnny Jasavicius went on to add that they were working on them for weapon optics. However, they're not quite ready for 3.2.3. That being said, they've solved the major technical hurdle and it's now all about implementation. Getting this working on things like visors and ship HUDs as well are plans but are going to require a lot more work. They also added that this isn't the kind of true night vision we have in the real world today, where you can see things in either bright green or in black and white with infrared. However, it's more of a light enhancement, where looking down the scope makes things look as if they're more in light than they actually are. Whatever it is, they've said that it looks really good and I can't wait to see it. Anyway, that's that for the Q&A. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to leave it here. I'll see you in the next one.